Hello, everyone. Welcome to another VantagePoint AI live YouTube session here today, where we're going to be covering support and resistance, how to use support and resistance to identify really, significant trends, whether those be reversals or even continuations of current trends. But either way, support and resistance really helps to provide very significant pivot points within a trend or a trade. And so understanding where those levels are and how to use those in your trade strategy is what we're going to be focusing on today. Now, of course, just keep in mind, I'm not a licensed advisor, so anytime we dive into this, this is purely educational, but ultimately we want you as the trader to be able to make those trade decisions on your own. So we're going to go ahead and dive on into our VantagePoint software here, and let's go ahead and just dive right on in and get things started for today. Now, before we get into the charts though, I do want to know kind of who in our session is familiar with support and resistance. So let me know in the chat if you can. You can communicate with me during the session in the chat. So certainly let me know. And that way I kind of have a starting point for us today, whether you're new to support and resistance, or maybe you've been trading with it for decades. Who knows, right? I'm sure we have a lot of different experience levels here in our session for today. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of your experience with support and resistance so we know where to start. But I'm going to keep an eye on that chat as we go through our session for today. So looking forward to that. So let's go ahead and dive on into the charts. All right, this is the fun stuff, right? And don't worry, I'm going to ask for some ticker symbols as well. But there are some, significant markets out there right now that are at some key support levels, if you will. And we're going to go over support and resistance here in just a moment, but certainly want to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as identifying just the key indications of a trend shift in VantagePoint. For those of you who might just be seeing this for the first time, maybe this is your first time ever even using artificial intelligence in the markets, and that's what VantagePoint specializes in. So let me know down in that chat window as well, so I know kind of who is very familiar with VantagePoint, who might be just seeing it for the very first time. But either way, let's make sure that we're all on the same page. Years. All right. Well, thank you, Damien. I definitely appreciate that for sure. So let's talk for a little bit. For those of you who are not familiar with support and resistance, let's just do a quick assessment on how to, one, read support and resistance, but also how to read those VantagePoint indicators. So I'm going to go ahead and dive on in just to some of the basics here. But essentially, I cover this in the beginning of every session. I want you guys to understand that green for up, red for down. So if you can remember that through the session, you'll really understand a lot of what the software is already telling you, whether you've been using VantagePoint or this is your first time. Green for up, red for down. That would mean green for bullish, red for bearish, right? So with our trend shifts in the market, it's really important to understand the timing behind those trend shifts. And that's where our predictive indicators come into play. And these predictive indicators are powerful and powered by artificial intelligence. So what we're going to do is just quickly go ahead and review. So if you see that blue line coming up, sorry, I had some chats coming in, so I wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing anything, but thank you guys for your participation. That always helps. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well. But let's go ahead and start with that crossover that we see here on 9-5. If you guys can see my crosshair, oh, sorry, there we go. There's my pen. That's what I was looking for. All right. So if we see this crossover right here where the blue line crosses above, the trend turns green, and lo and behold, then we have the expectation of a bullish trend beginning, right? And then of course, if we take a look down at our neural index, this is expecting that bullish move as well, giving us confirmation from two different predictive indicators that we do have a bullish trend expectation on the horizon. Now, I say that because look, that crossover happened quite a while ago, right? A couple of days ago, in fact. And so when we take this into account, that confidence that predictive data can give us can really help, along with that confirmation, to help you make a more informed, more confident trade decision. And ultimately, that's what we want you to have when it comes to your own trade strategy. Make a confident, make an informed trade decision based on your own particular trade strategy. So again, looking at the next indicator down, we're just kind of running right down along the line here of our timing indicators, which is our crossover up here, our price indicator, which is the neural index just below that, and then our predictive differences, which really measure the strength of a trend. Can also be considered a kind of the first piece of momentum, if you will. So we'll maybe have some time to dive into some momentum also in today's session, but really want to focus on support and resistance here. So with our indications and our confirmation coming from our predictive indicators right on down the line, we would then check our final line of defense, which would be our predictive trade candle. And we really want to make sure that we're seeing a particularly higher high and possibly even a higher low. That's the trade range for the next day, or in this case, for today. Keep in mind that any time that you're looking at a VantagePoint chart, you're actually looking at predictive data for the next 1, 2, and 3 days. What happened before? Okay, that's fine. But if you didn't act on it, well, there's really nothing we can do about that. But what we can do is look forward to help give you a proactive approach. And that's exactly what VantagePoint is helping you to do here. So essentially, when you are seeing that confirmation from our points of confirmation, right? Those 4 points, then you have good confidence that that trend would expect to be bullish. Now, what trade strategy or what position you would take in that scenario would be a little bit different depending upon the trader. And so VantagePoint does have several capabilities of, customizing the different time frames for individual traders as well. But overall, for any really style of trading, particularly that swing style of trading, VantagePoint is going to give you that 1, 2, and 3 day predictive data to help you make those decisions and be proactive about the approach. So you're like, Nikki, what does that have to do with support and resistance? Well, we haven't quite gotten there yet, but we do have support and resistance indicators that you can also add to your chart as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull up that support. Oops, it helps if you spell it correctly. There we go. So we can actually put on that verified support zone. So let's go ahead and add our support zone onto the chart here. So that way everyone, let me just do a quick refresh here, guys. Sorry about that. Gotta love going live when your indicators apply. There we go. All right, little quick refresh will do it just fine. So as we can see here, we have a support level where each of these green arrows are noted. So what does support really mean? What is support? For those of you who are familiar with support and resistance are simply past price points that can and will likely have an impact on future price action. And so if we know that past price points will impact the future price action, it might be a good idea to know where those reactive price points lie. We also call them pivot points. So you'll hear me say a lot of times that support and resistance will act as pivot points for the trend. And you can see here that our support that we are seeing previously, that we've established way back in June, all right, we can see a support level was established back in June that is now impacting our current price action, all right? So as you can see, price is really just bouncing along this support level. And if you notice, it's really tough for price to break through that support level. And that's because, again, past price is impacting future price action. Support is actually where sort of buyers reside. And so once price comes down or falls down to a certain point, like a retracement point, we would expect to see some buyers starting to take some action here. And lo and behold, that's what we have happening. But knowing where that level is sitting is really important for your entry timing, but also for your position management as well. As you can see, we have a larger reversal expected to happen here coming out of that bearish trend. In fact, VantagePoint identified that right back here with the crossover. Yes, way before this big candle, guys, right? So if you want to know when to get out earlier to make sure that you are protecting yourself from things like this, VantagePoint definitely helped in this scenario and many, many, many scenarios along the way to help you navigate through and avoid things like this. And so coming forward, we can see at our support point, price is actually elevated or pushed up by that support. Support supports price. That's why I love to have these arrows on the screen, and some of these indicators are additional, add-ons that you can choose to add to your chart. But support is one of those that you can actually add the arrow so you can see really the direction of impact. And of course, you want to see what this might do to price action. So a little less thinking and a little bit more efficiency. So as we see that price movement take place, bouncing off of that support. But there's one other piece that we need to make sure we understand, which is also resistance, right? You heard me say in the beginning, support and resistance. And so in the years that I've been teaching VantagePoint and these advanced predictive indicators, it's important to know that there's a counterpart to support, which is resistance. So has anyone ever gotten into a trade and then all of a sudden it just goes against you immediately? Who's had that happen to them, right? I'm sure everybody is silently raising their hands in their office, right? Yes, Damien, I do, and we can absolutely go over that as well. I'll dive into as much as we have a chance to today, but some of those Larry Williams indicators can definitely help you navigate through support and resistance as well. So thank you for that question. And go ahead and just type in any questions that you guys have. We certainly want to make this, as interactive and as educational as possible. And support and resistance is one of those key factors. So we're going to go ahead and add on that resistance zone as well. So let's just go ahead and turn that on. Oh, let me just do a quick chart refresh here. It wants to make me do that. There we go. All right. So now we have resistance. Well, if anybody is worried about having, a big kind of screaming red flag before entering into a position, resistance can certainly give you a warning signal that you may want to be cautious entering into that position. Now, here's the thing, with any indicator, with life really, if you can see things coming, they become a lot less scary, right? Because you can navigate through them. So you shouldn't be scared of support or resistance or fearful of support or resistance. You should use them as a really, strategic piece of your technical analysis to your trade plan. And maybe your trade plan says you don't trade up against support and resistance, and that's okay. It is a higher risk scenario. But if you are a high risk trader and you're okay trading up against support or resistance, then there may be some other rules that you follow along in a high risk scenario. Maybe you put on tighter stops. Maybe you take a smaller position size. There's lots of different ways that you can manage that capital, manage your position for that higher risk situation. So you don't have to be fearful of it and miss out, but you're also still protecting yourself wisely, making those strategic decisions instead of just kind of hoping and praying for the best, because it's certainly not a strategy, especially when it comes to the markets. So as we can see here, we have a support level that price is bounced off of. Well, at this crossover point here, we can see we actually do have quite a little ways to run before we hit this resistance level. All right, so if you are looking from support to resistance, that's one thing that you can evaluate before entering into your positions is, do we have enough runway for this trend to really take off, or are we going to get stalled out pretty quickly? All right, so that's something I want you to keep in mind as we look at the charts today and we go through our analysis on whether it's some of the charts that I already have pulled up or whether or not you guys want to take a look at some charts of your own choosing as well. So hi, Avendra, great to have you here. Elisa as well. Joe, thank you. All right, guys. So let's go ahead and jump on over to another chart. This was just CRS, and this was one of the charts that came up in a support IntelliScan, which is our scanning tool that we have here in VantagePoint. So if you ever want to scan for new opportunities and find great potential opportunities that are at these pivot points, you can use the IntelliScan, our scanning tool here in VantagePoint, to do so as well. So as you can see, that bounce off of support right here was identified on 9/4. That was last week. All right, with good strength coming in. So we're going to talk about strength here in just a moment. But let's go ahead and take a look at Etsy, right? Because we've got a chart that kind of comes up, comes down, comes up, comes down. And this is actually a great example of support and resistance being these primary pivot points within a trend. And so vitally important to be able to see those key pieces. So I'm just going to do a quick shortcut here for us. I'm going to just right click and save this chart as our default so we can actually apply those properties to our support and resistance over here. We'll just load from default, and that way I can get that support and resistance on there pretty quickly. There we go. So all sorts of little shortcuts here from a software standpoint that we can utilize to make your analysis just so much easier, in combination with, of course, the predictive data as well. But now seeing these pivot points on the chart, we can really start to see how this trend has been shaped by the support and resistance levels. Now, keep in mind that just as I mentioned, your support levels really being where buyers reside, resistance, which is this red area, is really where sellers reside. So of course, that kind of old adage, buy low, sell high. Well, if prices drop down low, there's probably a lot of buyers down here, right? And then of course, as price jumps up, there's going to be a lot of traders wanting to take profits. Sometimes institutions will take profits at that point as well, and then continue to drive that price back down. So this really creates, again, those pivot points within the trend. Now, if you notice, we have price that got stalled right here. All right, so I'm going to focus on this area for a moment because support can help you identify that bounce, but it can also tell you where you also may want to take advantage of some profit taking opportunities. Now, I'm not telling you what to do here at every resistance point. You may not want to exit out, but you certainly would want to know that the position is at a little higher risk as we approach those resistance levels. Because as the arrow depicts here, resistance is going to have a downward pressure on price. So as we approach resistance, it's going to have a little bit of a barrier to break through before being able to continue on through its current trajectory. And that's what we see here. In fact, resistance became such a barrier that it in fact shifted the trend into a reversal. And so let's take a look at how we could have seen this maybe a little bit earlier, because looking, we can see our resistance level, almost said support, but resistance level right here that happened back early August, maybe late July. Let me grab my my crosshairs and I'll tell you. There we go. So, late July, early August, 7:30. There we go. So we can see our resistance level was established here on 7:30. In fact, we really have a resistance level that was established back here on 6/9. Now, I say 6/9 because on 6/9, if you notice, we were unable to break this level on 7/24. So that resistance was established when that red arrow showed up. And when does this zone impact price? Well, when price reaches that level, it's going to be an obstacle for price to get through. And if you notice, price action does break that level, but it fails to stay above. So basically the water was too hot, right? It said, oh nope, we've got to come back down. We don't have enough momentum to continue pushing us through that resistance. And so here we can see that our previous June resistance level held very strong here and did not allow price to continue into its uptrend. Now, oftentimes you'll see a retest of this level, all right? And we can see that price comes down and comes back up and retests. And what happens here? again, we fail to break that level. Now, when I say we fail to break that level, that's because even though we tested it, our price action slid all the way back down and we ended up closing below. So I want everybody to focus on the closes when we're talking about support and resistance. The close is what will tell you a lot about whether or not that trend might be able to break a support and resistance level or bounce off of it. And in this case, we had a bounce off of that resistance and we fell all the way back down to our next support level, right? So if you notice, again, support was established previously. I'm sorry, I apparently drew a terrible straight line there. So let me try a little bit better. There we go, a little better there. So as you notice, we hit our resistance and price is not likely to continue through that resistance level. It's going to have a tough time breaking through. We can see on the price action, and we can also see the strength, little precursor to what's to come here, but we can also see we're losing upward strength. So do we have kind of the stamina to continue pushing upwards? And the answer is no. We can see that in our strength indicators and we can see that confirmed in the price action. And so looking at that price action, now we can, well, see that if you were to enter into a bearish position on this, right, because we do have a crossover as well, that maybe your profit target would be the next support level, which in fact we do come down and hit here. So we can see that these pivot points not only act as potential signals for reversals and entries, but also as profit targets. Who's using profit targets in their trade strategy right now? Let me know in the chat, please. All right. Perfect. Letting me know just a little bit more about your strategies just helps us to dig a little deeper on some of those key pieces there. All right. So, and don't forget, if you need more information on any of the topics that we go over in these live streams, these are, of course, for your education, whether you're a VantagePoint user or you're not. That's okay. We want to provide that education. And so support and resistance is a concept that should be used whether you're using VantagePoint or not. And if you need more information on VantagePoint or, again, any of those topics we cover, you can go to that VantagePointForecast.com. And I'm sure we dropped it in the chat a few times for you as well, because again, we want you to have resources for your trading and just to help you become a more confident trader as well. So as we take a look and jump on through our next resistance level, we can see that after hitting that support, let me grab that pen here again. All right, so after hitting our support, ooh, that got a little bit big. There we go. All right. After hitting that support level, we bounce, and you can see that shift in strength coming right up against that support level. That's going to be very, very important, is seeing a support level along with a shift in momentum. And so when we see those two in agreement, this sort of floor being established by support and then momentum or strength going along with that support level, then we have nice confidence that this could be a potential shift. And then, of course, confirm with those predictive moving averages and our neural index. And then, of course, the strength has already been confirmed. So we have our 4 points of confirmation along with that bounce off of support. And I just mentioned profit targets. So who can tell me what we'd be looking out for is this resistance level right up here. And you can see we've got plenty of room to run. Tell me in the chat if you'd be okay with a run like that on a swing trade, right? I don't think there's one person in this room that wouldn't tell me yes on that, right? At least I hope not, because if you take a look to see where we have that crossover, and I'll just go crossover to crossover for us here, or in fact, let's go crossover to that resistance level since we're using that as a potential profit target. So you've got a 15.39% just based off of the crossover, the bounce off of support with those points of confirmation as well, running all the way up using that resistance as a profit target. Now, you might not have gotten out at that resistance level. You could set that profit target, and if it goes higher, you can always move up stops and slightly adjust for that position management. But in that case, if you were using it, then you would have just gotten stopped out the next day, protected those profits from a major downslide that happens after. Why? because we fail off of that resistance level and we can no longer break any higher from our price action here. All right, so let's take a look. Just kind of coming through here, looking at the chat. Give me 1 second, guys. Just want to make sure I don't miss anything. All right, so let me ask this. Are there any charts that you guys want to take a look at? Let's just take like the first 2 or 3 that get entered in. We'll take a look from a support and resistance standpoint. I'd love to kind of get your take on what's kind of what opportunities are you guys looking at, and are you using support and resistance in those opportunities? And as I wait for some of that to come through, what I'm going to do is let's go through our next pivot point that we see right here in the chart in this predictive analysis. And so if we look here, we do have that crossover. What did we bounce off of? Everyone say support, right? Even if you're saying it with me silently. But you can see we bounced right off of that support level right here, right? So as we approach support, the question is then, do we have a shift in momentum? So those are kind of the 2 steps you should be taking here. As we approach support, do we have a shift in momentum? All right, and these are critical questions you should be asking yourself before you enter into a position based off of support and resistance. So let's take a look back at our previous support level. We can see those green arrows. So everywhere we have green arrows and then those dotted lines coming on out, that's where a support level was established. And that level could then impact future price, which is why it's pushed forward. And so here we can see we do approach a support level in our bearish trend. How do we know the likelihood of breaking through that level? And well, put simply, that's that next question I told you to ask yourself, which is, do we have momentum going with the trend or against it? And we can see here that coming up to this point, we actually have bearish momentum confirming that we do have enough strength to potentially push ourselves lower. All right. So once we are able to break through that support level, we already knew that that was likely to happen because we had strength continuing to push us down further into that trend. All right. So 2 questions. Where is the level at? And what is our strength in the trend at that level? So let's take a look and see at our next support level that we approach, which is actually right here. And we can see at this support level, do we have continuing bearish momentum, or do we have a shift in that momentum that could signal we may not be able to push through any lower through the support level? And if you notice, look at that shift in momentum coming from those predictive indicators down at the bottom that measure the strength of the trend. That tells us that bearish trend is starting to weaken and we're up against support. Likelihood of a bounce is probably pretty high. All right. And so that's really what trading is about, is stacking the odds, stacking those probabilities in your favor. So we need to know when it's important to stack those odds more than other times, right? So let's see. All right, got a couple of ticker symbols here, so I had to get on into the chat there to take a look, but let's go ahead and jump on in that shift. That's right, Elisa, you got it. Anytime you see a shift in the strength of a trend up against a support or resistance level, you know that there's something that might be happening, and usually that's exactly what occurs. And so let's take a look at PFF. All right, that was the ticker symbol from some of you that I got in here. So let's look at PFF for a second. So if you take a look at PFF, what happened recently? And we have quite a few support and resistance levels in this scenario. So let's walk through this together. All right. So we could even back this out to a 6-month view. And you can see this is why the support and resistance level, especially on the predictive values, is incredibly important, because we can look back months to see what those resistance levels are, because you will notice that even a resistance level that happened back in March will still impact future price action. In fact, what happened here during the month of July and August is that we were right up against, in this particular market, we were right up against some very heavy resistance that was established way back here in March. So you could try to draw these on your screen, one at a time. It would take a lot of time to calculate all of these support and resistance points and plot them on a chart, a lot of dots, right? But VantagePoint makes it very easy because it's going to use and compute these on its own, so you can have the data right at your fingertips and see the most current data that's impacting price action or potentially impact price action, right? So let's just go ahead and zoom on in a little closer here. All right, let's just add those plus buttons. It's like zooming in on a map. VantagePoint's kind of like a map for your trading anyway, so I like that analogy. Where is our current resistance? So as we sort of walk through this trend here, and we can see we went through some consolidation here. All right, so this is important to point out. Now, this was a chart you guys had asked for, so thank you, Mo. But who's ever heard of what's called a channel? Have you ever heard that term? Whether or not you know what it is or not, but have you heard of a channel when it relates to trading? Let me know in the chat, please, because that's going to be an important concept that I want to make sure everybody understands. So let's review it here. But if you notice, support and resistance can create what's called a channel. And so what we have happening here on PFF is very heavy resistance on the upside and support down here below that. And you'll notice that we have that established support level down here that we fail to break. So we've just got this pivot point of price back and forth like a ping pong ball, stuck in between this channel of support and resistance. All right. And so when price is stuck in a channel of heavy support and resistance, that's when you need to be a little bit more cautious, right? Or maybe your profit taking opportunities are shorter term, because if you're trading within a channel, you've also got those pivot points that you can see. So if you're a shorter term trader, maybe you like those pivot points, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's many different ways to trade the same chart depending upon the type of trader you are. Maybe you're a trader that likes to look for bigger breakouts though, right? So a channel might be something that you would avoid, this sideways movement here, right? Now, VantagePoint's going to help you navigate through that as well, because look at your strength indicators here. Everyone sees that these are pretty much so sideways here at all times, right? There's really not a lot of significant bullish or bearish, up or down movement here within our predictive differences. And so when we see that happening, we don't likely have the strength to break out of that support or resistance channel, right? So where do we have the strength to break out of that channel? Well, we talked about momentum, right? And if you notice with your predictive differences, you can see that shift that occurs right here, kind of beginning of August here, if you will, along with that bullish crossover. Now, you may be cautious right up here against that resistance that we know prices already had a tough time breaking through. But once we see the strength backing that trend, once price breaks through that wall of resistance, it says, whew, all systems go. We've got momentum. We've been pushing through this wall of resistance for quite some time. And then all of a sudden, boom, we have a breakout on our hands, right? And so this is what is often referred to as a breakout, and we'll typically see those bouncing off of a level of support or breaking through a level of resistance. And those can be very, very lucrative type of trading opportunities, and oftentimes we'll see that in longer continuous trends. And so we've certainly had a lot of those recently, haven't we? So at least in the last couple of months. So let's take a look and see current day where we're at. We notice that on 9/2, we hit support, and the next day, right, we hit support here on 9/2, right? Because you see this support level that was way back here on 821, hit that support level and tried to break it on 9.2. Now we did break below, but we have another support level to contend with, and then we can see that shift in momentum that occurs on 9.3. So the likelihood of continuing back down, one, we have a gap. So if you do any type of gap analysis, you'll know what I'm talking about here. But we have that support, kind of sticking to our support level discussion here, with support and that shifting momentum. See that lighter blue line? That's the 1 day trend strength. So the next day, that next 1 day out, where does our trend strength shift? We can see that shift into bullishness as we hit that support level. And of course, then we see the continuation as well. Now, again, if you are a shorter term trader, you may, or an earlier entry type of trader, you may want to shift over to that short term expectation. Just as we had that short term 1 day strength indicator with the lighter blue line, we now can see we have a shorter term, more reactive crossover here that looks out 1 day using 1 day of predictive data. Now, this is something that I think Mo had requested. So I'm going to go ahead and just pull open the back end of the software here so you guys can see what are the inner markets when it comes to the various stocks that we have pulled up here. Now, each one of these is going to be vastly different because the intermarkets are what really powers the artificial intelligence. This is the information we're actually deriving from the neural networks that's looking at millions of global data points to look at those global markets to identify the top markets that are actually impacting the ETF of PFF. Now we know that this is ETF because it tells us right here, this is a basket of stocks that are traded. It is in the US or the United States ETF sector, if you will. And we have several factors that are impacting this asset. Some of these might be assets that are included in this ETF, of course, but others like currencies. Here we've got the euro, US dollar, you've got the yen and the US dollar as well. You've even got, Ethereum ETFs in here also. So currencies, cryptocurrencies, stocks, other ETFs as well are all driving these factors. This is actually the data that goes into all of the predictive calculations here in the VantagePoint software. So when you see this predictive blue line on the screen that creates this trend timing, this is not just a simple crossover with simple moving averages. We're actually looking at the driving factors and using that information to calculate the timing crossovers. So really, really powerful to help you better understand the shifts in the trend and also the current trend expectation as well. So let's go ahead and continue on. So as we see, we bounce off of our support level here, right? And what is our current expectation as we drive right on in through resistance? And we can see that we do still have bullish strength here as we push through resistance right here. And this is the beautiful thing about VantagePoint is it's going to give you this sort of resistance zone, right? So where you see that red zone is saying, all right, there is some downward pressure on price that could occur here. You want to know where the obstacle lies so you're not fearful of it. You already have a game plan or an action plan when price reaches that level. Guys, that's just good position management, right? That's good entry management. That's just good strategy management. When you know where your trade might have a little bit of trouble, right? You don't want to just ignore these key levels because these key levels can tell you a lot about what you may want to do moving forward so you can trade proactively versus just reactively to, oh no, it went against me, right? Because that's usually when people get reactive, is when it went against them. So have a plan ahead of time so you know if price hits this resistance level and the shift in momentum occurs, which is not what happened here, right? But if it would, then you would have already known what to do there and you wouldn't be questioning yourself or your sanity. And you have a plan of action, so you can take action rather than wondering what if, right? And so in like I said, in over half a decade of teaching traders, within VantagePoint and using the artificial intelligence, just that what if is so dangerous in the markets. You should have a plan. You should trade the plan. But how do you know what the plan is if you don't know where you're headed? And these predictive indicators will tell you that. And the key levels like support and resistance are going to tell you where those obstacles lie, so you know how to accommodate that plan when needed as well. So let's take a look at another one. Now, another one that is up against support here recently, been a lot of talk about it, is CrowdStrike, right? So let's just take a look at CrowdStrike on that from that support standpoint or resistance, right? So if we take a look at wrong button here, guys. So let me just jump on back. I'm gonna click yes. There we go. All right. Load from default. That's what I wanted. So we'll just load that up. So that way I've got those support and resistance levels on here as well. And so this is a great example of where you may want to be careful if you're already up against a resistance, or finding ways or assets that have a little bit more runway for that price to really start generating some momentum or some steam within the trend. And so if you notice, what we have happening here is that bounce off of support. But take a look at our previous support level back on 820, because if everyone notices here, 820 is really the level that we're contending with here. And I say that because if you'll see, and price has tried to test this level many times. We've in fact tried to test it 1, 2, anywhere price touches this line, 3, 4, 5. 5 times we tried to break that level. Anyone guessing at this point that that level's probably pretty strong? When prices failed to break that level 5 times, we know that that level is probably going to hold pretty strong at this point. All right. Now, what about, all right, let me just read. What about bounce versus breakout with support? Sure. Yeah, we can take a look. But Mo, remember what I said about support and resistance, the bounce versus the breakout is really going to be told through the story of momentum, right? Or strength within the trend. So if we still have good trend strength at a support or resistance level, the likelihood of a breakthrough would be likely. We'll take a look at a couple of examples. I'm sure we can find some. But right now we're looking at a potential bounce, right? So let's go through that scenario, since that's what we have here on the chart with our current dealings, right? So notice at that support level, we can see that not only do we contend with the previous support level, but we've also established another new support level as well. And so price failing to break through that support is really significant here, because we haven't been able to close below that support level, right? Remember, closing price is going to tell you a lot about the expectation of that trend. And so at support, are we closing below the support level? The answer is no. So we know that support level is strong, which means it would have a strong upward pressure on price, right? So with strong pressure pushing price up, do we have the momentum to back that shift? And we can see that we do have fairly strong momentum starting to push us up even higher, from that trend strength standpoint as well. And so take a look at your predictive trading range here as well on CrowdStrike. We can see that we've got a predictive trading range. So, if we are continuing to make higher lows, that would be an indication of continued bullish momentum. And we can see our momentum here, even from just our basic momentum indicators with the predictive differences, will really help you better understand that shift And then, of course, you do have other predictive indicators like RSI and percent R, some of those Larry Williams fans, percent R. There's that one for you. That is predictive here within the software. MACD, true strength index. There's lots of different momentum indicators that you can use that all look at price from a very different perspective. So in fact, even if you wanted to add those onto the chart. Now, again, these momentum indicators, some of them are additional add-on indicators. The ones you're seeing on my screen down here at the bottom, though, those all come just with VantagePoint. But let's take a look at some of these other momentum indicators that we can see giving us confirmation of that potential shift. So RSI, if anyone uses RSI, that's a relative strength index. Of course, it's going to tell you the strength of that trend or speed of price action based on the momentum. And so if we see RSI is just an oscillator, so we're looking at the slope of that line, and that's going to give us a bullish signal. Stochastics is another very sensitive momentum indicator, and at this point we also have that bullish indication. Now TSI, a little bit more conservative when it comes to momentum. And you'll notice TSI, we're looking for that red line for bearishness to be below or bullishness when that shifts above. Now that'll walk you through a very, well, not very, but a longer trend expectation or a stronger trend expectation because it is more conservative. And so here on TSI, in fact, we do have that bullish shift that's already occurred previously right here. So you can put your crosshairs right over that area and you can see where that shift really occurs. That red line has stayed above the blue line, meaning it's remained bullish this entire time. So again, do we have continued bearish momentum or are we seeing that shift into bullish momentum here? And if you notice, guys, here, you know, things are really starting to shift bullish at a strong support level here, and also with a crossover and plenty of room to run for resistance. So this is where you may, as a trader, you know, start thinking about potential bullish entry points. Now, again, everyone's going to be a little bit different, you know, depending upon your trade style, whether you trade options, whether or not you want to leg into a position as well. So, you know, you've got to do what's right for you as a trader, but ultimately using that support and resistance, we can better understand the kind of larger narrative that's happening here with price action and the trend and the strength of potentially reversing out of that movement there as well. So let's go ahead. Let's see. I'm just going to look back through here. All right. What other types of support and resistance indicators do you guys use as traders? Because, you know, there are many support and resistance indicators, all giving you a little bit different kind of perspective on price action and the trend. But let me know in the chat. I'd love to kind of hear from you guys on what support and resistance indicators you would like to see in the session. We can evaluate charts using those support and resistance indicators. And, you know, quite frankly, they're likely predictive as well using the VantagePoint software. So one other support and resistance indicator that's great to utilize is the triple cross. So I'm going to come to Hood. Robinhood has been one of those markets that we mentioned earlier. Things have been in a fairly long continuous bullish trend here recently. Yes, we've had a few pullbacks, a little bit of scare, you know, in the market here recently, but overall, things still looking fairly bullish, you know, over the course of the year, even the last quarter or so. You know, I don't think any trader would argue that point, but how do we navigate through that? How do we know that we, you know, are not entering in at a high where it might pull back against you? And again, this is where support and resistance can significantly help you in navigating that scenario, whether you're looking for that reversal type situation that we saw on CrowdStrike, where we're looking for a long downtrend and then things expecting to reverse, or if you're looking to take advantage of some quick moves within a currently bullish trend. Maybe you missed out on the initial run and you're wondering, oh my gosh, where should I enter back in, right? How many times have some of you entered in at a high here, like on 7-2, right? We're like, oh my gosh, look at this run. I've got to jump on the bandwagon, right? But you're a day late and $1 short to catch that train. And so all of a sudden it pulls back on you and you're either out at a loss because you got stopped out. Maybe you exited out because you got nervous and just couldn't withstand that pullback, or, you know, various other scenarios, right? You take your pick. I've heard it happen. Trust me. So if you take a look, good Mo, I'm glad, that's perfect. Look at that. I was going to actually take a look at the triple cross on this one, because in a longer continuous trend, our triple cross, and clearly Mo has the VantagePoint software because he knew what the triple cross was. Many of you do. If you don't have VantagePoint, let me know in the chat, because I will go into a little bit more detail. I want to make sure everybody understands, but key support and resistance levels are something that every trader, you know, can utilize, these key pivot points. And really it's simply supply and demand. All right. Are we at, you know, a place where, you know, supply and demand are sort of at extremes, right? And that's what really establishes these support and resistance levels. And so let's take a look at the triple cross. And for those of you who are not familiar with support and resistance, or the triple cross, or VantagePoint, these moving averages that you're seeing on the screen right now, this is the triple cross. We call it the triple cross because it consists of 3 predictive moving averages, okay? Now, each of these moving averages has its own calculation and incorporates a different capacity of predictive data within the moving averages. So your short term is going to be a 3-day predictive exponential moving average. Your medium term is an 8-day, and then our T cross long is going to be an 18-day. Now, these are exponential moving averages with the predictive calculations already factored into those lines. So beautiful thing about that, you don't have to worry about the calculations. You don't have to try to do that on your own, right? I wouldn't want to do this, and I've been doing this for years. But what I would want to do is evaluate those signals when it comes to your trade strategy. Now, because it's 3 different predictive moving averages, you can really evaluate the relationship between those moving averages. And so where we see those moving averages all in agreement, you know, everybody's nice and consistent, well, then things are moving nicely along. This kind of green for go here, right? So as we see that green for go, that is our sign from the triple cross that we are in a strongly established bullish trend. All 3 predictive moving averages are in agreement, and we're, again, just moving up with really good integrity behind that bullish movement. So for you traders who might trade a little longer term or like to be a little bit more conservative, this might be the perfect view for you, right? So also too, though, for shorter term traders, this view can also act as additional levels of support and resistance. So the T cross long level, in fact, because it's a longer predictive moving average, that 18-day predictive moving average, can act as a very dynamic level of, yes, I'm going to say it, predictive support in an uptrend. So that's what we have here, predictive support in an uptrend, or predictive resistance in a downtrend. All right, so you could even consider this a downtrend, right? Because we did break below that T cross long level, that dark blue line, and even easier, it turned red. All right, so we know we're in a potentially downward trend. All right, so let's take a look at our current run that we had here previously, running all the way back from April. All right, so as we can see, we're going to look at price action here. All right. So just so you know what to focus on. So price action, of course, are going to be the candles, right? And so as we start to approach, as price action starts to approach that darker blue T cross long line, you'll notice that it has a hard time breaking through that level. Care to guess why that might be? Because it is a dynamic level of resistance at this point. Again, we're coming from a downtrend, so price would likely have some opposition to contend with when it comes to resistance, right? And so you could use this simultaneously or in conjunction with your resistance levels as well. So I'm just gonna at our support and resistance levels back on the chart here for a moment. We'll back that back out to the 6 month and switch the view to the triple crossover. Sorry, I've done this a time or two, guys, right? But taking a look back at that level, we see resistance right here using that T-cross long level. Now, once price breaks above that T-cross long level, and I'm going to say 2 days, so two closes above a significant level, whether it be support or resistance or the T-cross long level, or maybe even a different type of key level like a Fibonacci point, or breaking out of a channel, breaking a moving average. These are all key levels that you can use to help walk you through the trade and walk you through those potential shifts as well. And so most important piece here is that you're using multiple pieces of confirmation, all right? So anytime we talk about support or resistance, we're always going to factor in the crossover, the neural index, and our predictive differences as well. That should really come as second nature to our VantagePoint users. And if you still find yourself struggling with that, then hey, don't forget, we have plenty of training resources available for you beyond just our YouTube sessions. If you are a VantagePoint user, we have VantagePoint University sessions, every single week. So be sure to check those out as well, because we do have a plethora of resources. But that's sort of my shameless plug on all of the training that we do here and that we work so hard to provide to our family members. But let's go ahead and jump back into our T-cross long. In fact, I'm going to make this super simple for everybody. If you go to the indicator panel up here at the very top, you can even customize your view. Since we're focusing on that darker blue T-cross long, that 18-day predictive moving average, I'm just going to put simply that on the screen so you guys can see how our price candles react at this T-cross long level. And so you can really see how these predictive levels of support can help really navigate you through a longer term trend, right? This is kind of like a cross-country drive using, maps or, Google. So instead of, trying to just remember the directions, I would get lost. I'm geographically challenged. So I say take a right on Google and a left on maps. But that's kind of what VantagePoint does for your trading. Takes that guesswork out of it. And so as you can see, our price action breaks above that T-cross long level. And remember that second question that everybody should be asking themselves is, do we have strength behind that movement? And you can see we break that level, we're up against resistance, but do we have strength behind that movement? And yes, in fact, we do. And we have a bullish crossover here as well. We saw that previously in the view with all of our crossovers on the screen. And so when we have that confirmation, we've now broken out into a bullish trend. Well, price likes to go on sprints when it breaks out through things. So this was a question that came in earlier, and I said, you know what, I promise we are going to have some time to review this, right? So when we see price action approaching resistance along with bullish strength bouncing off of a support, right? But again, are we going to be able to break through that resistance? That's always the biggest question, is do we have the strength to break out? Previously, notice we did not. But what happens at this point when price approaches that resistance level? We have nice bullish strength coming back into the trend. So we not only have a bounce off of support, but we also have strength generating us enough steam, enough movement to break us through the obstacle of resistance. And boom, we have that breakout that occurs. So once the breakout occurs, understand that this is kind of like a sprint for price. Well, you can only sprint for so long, for so fast before, you have to take a rest, right? And that's exactly what happens with price. And that's typically what will establish a new resistance level. So once price is already run up, then boom, we have another hit of that resistance. And how do we know we're likely to break that resistance into the next breakout? Well, when we start to generate that strength back into the trend. Where do we likely see that reversion point? Right near that T-cross long, which also happens to coincide with another support level that was established previously. So when these two levels overlap, guys, this is incredibly important because now we're seeing two different levels that are overlapping. Remember, two separate calculations. These are not talking to each other, and they're coming to the same conclusion that we're at support. And so when we see those two layers or multiple layers lined up, this gives you confidence that this is probably a pretty strong level. So at this strong support level, do we have strength or weakness of the trend? And we have strength generating back into that bullish move on for another breakout. So you can see these pivot points in the trade where we're going to revert back down to that T cross long. If we fail to break below that T cross long level with renewed strength, we're likely in for that next breakout. You guys can see this happening many times where we come back down to a support level. So if you're managing your longer term position and you're looking for additional points to maybe add to your position, certainly adding at the high, probably not the best strategy, right? But adding at a reversion point, like the T cross long or that support level, could be a great way to take advantage of the next big bump and add to your position so you're not missing out and you're in fact growing your position as the trend goes in your favor, right? Not against you. And then once we start to hit major resistance here and we see bearish movement coming into that strength, and we close 2 days below that T cross long level, that's going to tell you that there's probably a significant shift coming. If you're not at, a profit taking opportunity, you might want to think about that, protecting profits, right? Or managing that position a little bit more closely, whatever you do to increase your risk management strategy when we're up against heavy resistance. Strength is coming out of the trend, bearish neural index, and we close below that, below that support level. Could we have a breakout to the downside, right? So again, price is broken down below. So our T cross long is no longer supporting that. It's actually pushing it down and acting as resistance at that point. So these are all really great ways to use support and resistance, not only for entries, but also for your position management and exit strategies as well. So I certainly hope that, every one of you picked up at least one or two things that you can take back and really apply to your analysis and hopefully give you an edge in your trade strategies as well. Use those in your own trade plan to make yourself a more confident trader. So we are going to be back next Thursday. So, of course, looking forward to that. We'll come up with another great topic, but also would love to hear from you guys as well. So if there are any questions during the sessions that you guys have, feel free to type those in the chat. Thank you for those of you who did that today, as well as your ticker symbols and suggestions. I love to analyze things live for you guys and just really dive deep into the artificial intelligence and the technical analysis, marrying those two together to give you guys a more confident approach and view of the market. So have a fantastic rest of your evening, everyone, and a great week ahead. We'll see you guys on the next session.